I'm going to talk a bit about beyond. So for 198 years, this place has been a place where people have gathered and the prayers of the saints have gone up from this place, and it's a special place. But as I've said, this isn't the church, this is the church. We're not in the business of being like the National Trust or English Heritage. We're not trying to preserve a monument. Our purpose is to follow Jesus and to make committed followers of Jesus and to share his love. That's what we are about as God's people. So we have this interesting balance of wanting to and needing to preserve this space. It's a valuable and a precious space, but also we don't want this to be the only thing that we're about. Andy mentioned Benjamin Haig-Allen. Benjamin Haig-Allen was one of the he founded the Church Mission Society group here in Huddersfield. So as well as being a man who used his cash to build a church, he had a passion for evangelism, and we continue to support the Church Mission Society through Catherine Lee, one of our mission partners. So Alan wasn't just about, let's just get a really great structure together. He wanted to share the gospel. He wanted literally a revival of people coming to faith in this town, meeting with God and following Jesus. And he built this church so that every kind of person could come. Some of the seats of the church, which is quite a radical thing, were reserved for the poor. Over 500 seats in this building were for the poor. He had a heart that everyone should know about Jesus. And so that is our heritage. Our heritage isn't simply about a building. Our heritage, going back to Christ, but through people like Benjamin Haig-Allen, is that people of every description, of every background, of every generation get to know Jesus. And so above and beyond isn't simply about the building. It's about people. It's about sustaining and developing the ministry and the mission and the evangelism that this church is called by its very nature to be and to do. If we don't do that, we are not a church. If we are not engaged in evangelism and mission, we are not a church. That is what God calls his church to be. You'll know that in recent times, as many of you will know, that this church has made a conscious decision to do some things differently. And that's included having different people head up different areas of ministry. And some of those people have been employed by the church. So before my time, Dan Wood, many of you remember Dan, who used to be our youth and children's coordinator, and also we shared him with Gledholt Methodist Church just up the road. More recently, we've appointed Natasha Lee to be our children's and families minister. We've appointed Ben Lees to be our worship pastor, and more latterly to work with students. We've appointed Matt Thurgood as our youth intern, and we've seen the fruit in a very short time of doing that. We're providing, if you like, different points of entry into the life of this church, different ways for people to belong to this church. Different groups. I stuck my head in to Little Lights a couple of weeks ago. Little Lights is our new toddler group. I know that for many years there was a toddler group here, and then that hasn't existed, and Natasha and a team have started Little Lights. And it's fairly small, but it's a bunch of people, some of whom I don't know. Another doorway into life in this church. And if you've joined this congregation more recently, you may be unaware of that actually this change has happened relatively quickly. And we've got a lot of issues around it. There are a lot of challenges that come with it. But my sense is that by and large, things are going fairly well. And there seems to be a buzz around our church at the moment. Many of you will know that 15 years ago, Holy Trinity sold a building. We had a church hall up on St. James's Road in Marsh, and 15 years ago, the church sold that. That's now the Magical Forest, where kids can go and tumble and climb. That was our church hall. We sold that church, and the proceeds from that sale were ring-fenced to be used for mission and evangelism. That's how we funded, for example, the work of Dan from out of that reserve. And that's actually how we're funding much of the appointments that we currently have. On top of that, many of you are giving into what's called our Youth and Mission Fund. You're giving around about £9,000 to add to that so that we can continue to be looking outwards, particularly in employing these different people. If you don't know, though, this is important that you do know, that by the end of next year, by the end of 2018, all that money from the sale of the church hall will have gone. We will have spent it, and I think we've spent it in a really good way, a really important way. But that ministry is not sustainable for too much longer. And actually, ministry and mission and evangelism in this church, if we do nothing, will need to change. And potentially, some of it will dry up. On top of that, we would also need to make some pretty special people redundant. So, through Above and Beyond, we're wanting to invest in God's kingdom purposes, in the work of the kingdom of God here. It's about the church doing what it was meant to do, to go beyond ourselves, to look outwards, to serve and bless others, to proclaim the gospel such that the kingdom of God advances and the building of God's church, you and me, grows. And that means we want to keep on investing in kids' work and in families ministry. We want to see our youth work continue to flourish. In the 6 months that Matt has been here as a 19-year-old lad, basically, our youth work has taken on a whole new life. And we don't want to lose that momentum. We want young people to know about Jesus and feel that this is a place and a people that they can belong to. We want our musical worship in its various and diverse forms to continue to thrive and be a blessing to God and to us. We want to do more than that, though. We want to be involved in mission and evangelism, which isn't simply about doing stuff here, but doing stuff out there, beyond these walls. We want to care for the lonely in our parish. We want to build on the work of Meeting Point, which by and large cares for and serves older folk. And many older folk in our immediate vicinity are lonely and isolated. We want to work with the poor, with the addict, with the refugee. We want to also resource the wider church, and by that I mean part of what we're doing through Above and Beyond is actually to give to those places and organizations that do not have the resources that we have. And that is part of what we hope that this initiative will achieve. We're doing some of this, but frankly, we're scratching the surface. There's so much more with God's power, with God's grace, and with actually a certain amount of resources we could do. And so Above and Beyond is ensuring that the timeline continues. We're hitting 2019, that will be our bicentenary. We don't want that to be a high point and then we just fizzle away. We want to invest in the next 100 or 200 years to leave a legacy. It's actually our turn now. This is our turn to play our part and see God's kingdom grow and advance.